This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
Hi, y'all, and welcome to Horsing Around. Saddle up and get ready to have a darn tootin', galloping good time as we trot out the show that's your ultimate horse source, of course. Find out how to use good old horse sense when it comes to breeding, feeding, training, and explaining. From practical tips on caring for your horse's health to advice on how to buy horse supplies, including bridles, halters, saddles, and more. So get ready to start horsing around with your host, horse expert and award-winning rider, Audrey Pavia. Howdy, Audrey.
Hi, welcome to Horsing Around on PetLifeRadio.com. I'm your host, Audrey Pavia, author of Horses for Dummies. Thanks for joining us. This week, our guest is Carole Devereux, author of the book Spirit of the Horse, The New Myths of Equus. Carole is an animal communicator who's going to share her understanding of spirituality as it relates to both humans and horses. We'll be right back with Carole after these messages.
Why the long face? I reckon Horsing Around will be back in the saddle right after we round up a few words from our sponsors.
Molly, here's your dinner. Zeus, that's not your food.
Don't let that happen to your precious cat. Elevate your cat's eating experience with the Cat Tree Tray. The Cat Tree Tray keeps your cat's food off the floor and conveniently located on the cat tree. It's the perfect way to eat. It's a beautiful wrought iron tray that easily attaches to your cat tree and keeps dogs and other critters out of your cat's dish. A must for multi-pet households. There's a 6-inch tray for large bowls and a 4-inch tray for smaller bowls. Purchase your Cat Tree Tray today. Go right now to cattreetray.com. That's cattreetray.com. CATTREETRAY.com.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
We know you're chomping at the bit to hear more horsing around. Well, we're back on the trail. So park yourself over yonder and set a spell. You ain't heard nothing yet.
Welcome back to Horsing Around. I'm your host, Audrey Pavia, and today we are talking to author and animal communicator Carole Devereux about her new book, Spirit of the Horse. Welcome, Carole.
Hi, how are you?
Good. First off, tell us what your book is about.
My book was written over a very long period of time, so it covers quite many years of my life, my experience with 3 horses that I adopted and rescued in the early 90s. And so once I started working with horses, I found a book called Animal Talk. And at that time, I'd never heard of animal communication, but that's what this book was about. And at the back of the book, there was a phone number you could call to get a reading with an animal. And I was pretty fascinated with the idea, so I made the phone call. And at that time, the author had decided to transfer all of her clients over to a woman by the name of Dr. Jerry Ryan. And she was in Oakland, California. And when I got in touch with her, I told her I had a horse. I had just bought a horse, and he had some very strange behavior. I'd never ridden horses before. I was 40 years old at the time. And I asked her if she could help me. And so she was in Oakland when I made the phone call, and I was in Portland, Oregon. And I asked her to talk to Buddy, and she did. And when she said she's going to put the phone down while she communicated with him, and that she would come back on the phone when she was finished. So the first thing that happened was she described a situation with Buddy and I that no one could have known about, because I didn't mention any of the particulars to her about the situation, and she gave me a full rundown of what was going on and what Buddy wanted to know, and asked me what I wanted him to know. And so that kind of got me hooked on the whole subject, because it was really fascinating what happened after that. And she came to visit me a few years later, and during that visit is when Buddy told her that he wanted to write a book with me. And that's how the book got started. I had no clue how to write a book with a horse, and years later I discovered the process of the hero's journey. And in the beginning, the first stages of the hero's journey, the person called to the mission resists as much as they can, because you have to put everything that you know aside, and you have to go off in this dark path that you don't know what the results are going to be. You don't know what's going to happen. And in that period in my life, I didn't think I was going to become an animal communicator. I had no idea what I was, going to do. I had just gotten married, and I'd gotten a horse, and I was, learning how to horseback ride, and found this book, and then all of a sudden I'm going 180 degrees the other way in a totally new direction. So when she said, he wants to write the book with you, I laughed in their face, Buddy and Jerry, and said, what's it going to be? Buddy Speaks? Because I came from the era, the beginning of actually, mediumship with the book Seth Speaks by Jane Roberts back in the, I think it was early 60s. So I thought, this is going to be interesting. And I said, well, what's it going to be about? And she said, it's going to be about the spiritual life of horses. And so I eventually, after about a year of balking at this whole idea, decided to go ahead and start. And that's how it got started. She would translate, she would communicate with Buddy in the beginning, because I wasn't very good at this. And she would ask him what he wanted to say and what he wanted me to do. And, he would start out with saying, well, let's tell people where horses come from and give them some background and grounding about the history of the horse. And so I would go off for weeks and months at a time doing all this research and reading books and books about that subject. And then I would make another phone call to Jerry, and we'd get on to the next chapter. So that's how the book grew in the beginning, and then after a while I kicked off the training wheels and did the communicating myself, and then Buddy and I were connecting just, maybe once a month. I would sit down and I would transcribe sections of the book at a time that he inspired and told me, this is what I want to say to the world. And we did that. That's how I guess became an animal communicator. That project started my career basically in animal communication, and then I started giving workshops and teaching other people how to do this themselves, and doing consulting and writing and teaching. And that's what I spent 15 years after that initial training writing this book.
What will people learn about the spirituality of horses from reading your book?
Well, they'll learn that we all are connected to a higher source, and each species has their own specific way of communicating with the higher power. So what people will learn from my book is how horses intuit spiritual messages from God, but the Native Americans call it the Great Mystery. And Neil Donald Walsh calls it life. He says life and God are synonymous. So it's a view of God from a non-human perspective. What people find is that it's identical to our view. So there's no disconnect. We have the same needs. We have the same desires. We want to eat and procreate and, be on this planet and live according to our highest spiritual potential. And all life has the same desire. And that's what I learned when I wrote this book with Buddy. It put me in a place of feeling oneness with all beings, all life, oneness with all life, because that life force is what animates all life, and that same life force is what inspires us to go to higher places in our mind and in our emotions.
Tell us about animal communication, how it works, and how it has broadened your understanding of both human and equine spirituality.
In my research during the process of writing the book, Buddy asked me to work with him on creation myths. And I didn't know very much about creation mythology, so I went and did a lot of research about that. And I found that all over the world, every nation and every people all over the world had a creation myth. So I said to Buddy, well, I assume that animals also have their own creation myths. And he said yes. And so by my reading and researching mythology, and I became, an avid reader of all of the Joseph Campbell books, and learned about most, from all corners of the world, learned their mythology. I learned what it meant to have a creation myth, and what it does for a nation and what it does for a people. And then I realized that animals have the same type of creation myths, and they're also broken down into species, different, not species, but breeds of the species. So it's not just a creation myth for horses, but there's a creation myth for an Appaloosa horse, or a thoroughbred horse, or a Frisian horse. Each one of the breeds have their own creation myths. And that, in itself was fascinating, and it made me realize that we all have a connection to our source if we would just, focus on it and be open to whatever messages we're getting, from that power, and then operate from that place of awareness so that we don't go back to egotistically trying to create a result that may or may not be the best thing for us, and not wanting a specific action to reap a specific reward, but to do something from your heart without any need for reward or credit, not doing it for credit, but just doing it because it means something to you. It comes from a place deep inside you that motivates you from another perspective. And doing that by honestly accepting that changes who you are, and it makes you feel more, I don't want to say human, it makes you feel more alive. Like there's a purpose in your life, like you have a reason for living. And it gives you that hope that there's not just chaos, that there's actual a design to the universe. We're all a part of that design. And horses gave me that perspective that I am a specific piece in a huge design, and that if I listen to my higher self and I operate from that place, I will flow with the higher design, and as a result be very happy.
Okay, well, that's some pretty amazing stuff. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to ask you a little bit about Buddy so we can learn more about him. So we'll be right back after these messages.
Why the long face? I reckon Horsing Around will be back in the saddle right after we round up a few words from our sponsors.
It's DesignerPetSweaters.com. Hand-knitted designer sweaters for your precious pup or cool cat. Beautiful couture patterns for your pets, including custom-knitted formal wear, casual wear, yachting, and even sports-themed. Many designer pet sweaters include feathered tammy hats, top hats, and a lot of sparkle. Each sweater includes leg loops, front paw sleeves, and leash opening. Visit DesignerPetSweaters.com to order your four-legged fashions today. Your pets will stay warm for the winter and be runway ready. Large or small, we fit them all. DesignerPetSweaters.com.
Let's talk pets.
Let's talk pets
On Pet Life Radio.
Pet Life Radio.
PetLifeRadio.com.
We know you're chomping at the bit to hear more Horsing Around. Well, we're back on the trail. So park yourself over yonder and set a spell. You ain't heard nothing yet.
Welcome back to Horsing Around. I'm your host, Audrey Pavia, and today we are talking to author and animal communicator Carole Devereux about her new book, Spirit of the Horse. Carole, you wrote the book with Buddy. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
I got married when I was 40, and my husband and I moved up to Portland, and at the time the property values were pretty reasonable up here, and we bought 16 acres on the top of a hill, and I looked around and I said, my God, this would be a perfect place to have a horse. I'd never had a horse before. And so I went out looking for a horse. My husband said, now don't buy a horse until you've got, taken riding lessons for a year and you're really sure that this is the direction you want to go in. And I said, okay. So I went and took riding lessons, and a year later, I said, this is what I want to do. I'm gonna do this. And I spent 3 months looking for horses. And I didn't know what kind of horse I wanted. I just, looked in that, for sale, ads for horses. And I think I looked at maybe 20 horses in a 3-month period. And that's when I found Buddy. I just went to a farm, and she was selling a 5-year-old pretty green quarter horse. She said he had been broken to the trail, which he barely had been, but I gave her the money, and we took Buddy home and put him in a boarding stable. And that was how we, started out with him.
Now, so I thought you told me that you had rescued your horses. Is that the other horses, not Buddy?
Yeah, the other horses were rescued. Buddy was my heart project, and I think I rode several abused horses during my search, but none of them felt the same way I felt when I was with Buddy. So the other 2 horses, one I rescued off the racetrack, and then the other one, another one off the racetrack, and then one who was left at a house that had burned down. He watched the house burn down, and then the people who owned the house, they fixed the house up, but when they went to sell the house, they said the horse comes with the property. So whoever was going to buy the house had to also want the horse. And I thought that was ridiculous. So I rescued that horse because he wasn't taking care of him. I brought him home. He was 29 at the time, and I thought I'll just give him a couple more good years. He lived for 10 more years.
Wow.
He died at age 40.
That's pretty unusual.
It is very unusual. He was a Spanish barb, and he was really a tough little guy. And his soul myth is also in the book. His name is Dutch.
Can you share one of the myths that you received from Buddy that you talk about in the book?
They're kind of complicated and one of the myths was Buddy's personal myth with me, and that's very deep and complicated. The other one is written by Ellie, who was the female racehorse who became Buddy's mate. She wrote a myth with me about the goddess of the horse, and that's also very complicated. I don't think I could tell that in just a few short sentences.
What about the horse creation myth? Did Buddy share one with you?
There were 5 creation myths. Those are right after the section about the prehistory of the horse.
Can you share one of those? Are those simple enough to talk about?
They're very deep and very moving, and you wouldn't get anything from it from just me giving you a short thing about it.
Okay.
It doesn't work that way.
So we'll have to read the book for that, right?
Yeah, I think
okay.
It goes through the process of reading the book.
Right. Okay. What do horses have to teach us about how to treat one another? I'm getting the sense that you learned that as you were doing this book.
Well, the first communication I ever had with Buddy was about that, and that was with Jerry Ryan on the phone. She was in Oakland, and I asked Buddy, what can we do to help make him happier in this boarding stable, because I didn't know if he was happy or not there, and it was mostly a Western barn, and I was writing English, and all the people there were kind of cowboys, and so I didn't feel like I fit in very well with them. So I said to Jerry, please ask Buddy, what can I do to make him feel more comfortable in his situation? And of course I thought he was going to come back, and this is my human anthropomorphizing the horse would be more hay, more time in the pasture, larger grain bucket, more deeper shavings, that kind of thing. He came back and he said to her, what would make me happier in the barn is when people treat each other better, because when they are fighting with each other, that negative vibration filters down to us, and we feel the tension. from the tension between the people. And so take, for example, if you were going out of town and I'm sitting here, in this barn, if you had a good relationship with some of these people, they would come in and they would, say hi to me. They would ask me how I was doing. Maybe they'd throw me another flake of hay or something, but they would take better care of me because of you, because of your willingness to treat them with respect, and vice versa. So what made him happier in the barn was when the people got along with each other.
That's really interesting because there's always drama at boarding stables, and, it never occurred to me that it would affect the horses.
It affects them tremendously.
Yeah.
You know how environment sensitive horses are? You move something in their environment and they go into the arena and something's been moved, they go crazy.
Yeah.
They want that environment to be very predictable because horses grew up, or they evolved, running from predators. So they had to become very sensitive to the environment, to every little thing in the environment. If something was different, that meant that there was a danger, that they were on alert. So even to this day, they're very sensitive to the vibrations in the environment, and people run their environment. They manage their environment. So to not think that what you say to your neighbor or how you feel about your friend 2 stalls down doesn't affect the horses is insensitive.
I guess, people are so caught up in their thing there that it doesn't even occur to them.
Yeah, it seems hard to believe. I mean, children are affected by their family environment, their home environment, and that's where horses live, is in those stables, in those little stalls.
Right.
So they're just as sensitive as children. If you live in an apartment and somebody's blaring their stereo, that affects you.
Well, when, I call them jailbreaks, when somebody gets out, somebody busts out of their stall and they run around and they, usually end up at the hay stack eating. Right. And you see the way the other horses react. It really does give you a clue that they really do have a sense of what's going on.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, they all get very excited. And you can always tell when a horse is out by the way your horse is acting in its stall.
Yeah, they almost cheer it on.
Exactly. Yeah, it reminds me of like the prisoners with their cups, banging their cups against the bars.
Exactly.
Make a run for it. Yeah, it's that's a really interesting point.
It's funny that you mentioned that because Buddy did that once. When we were bringing them in, he took off. Instead of going in the barn like he was supposed to, he and another horse took off and ran, half a mile down the road. And it took a while to get him back, but I knew he did it for all the other horses.
For their entertainment purposes.
Yeah, and everybody was trying to get him back.
Right. Well, unfortunately, Carole, that's all the time we have for today. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope everybody will check out your book. It's really unique and some really deep stuff here. And anybody who lives with horses really could learn a lot from it. Right. So thank you for being my guest.
Thank you.
And I'd like to ask our listeners to please take a look at the episode's note page on the Horsing Around website for more information on Carole and Spirit of the Horse. And if you have any questions or comments about Horsing Around, please email me at audrey@petliferadio.com. Until next time, happy trails.
Stop what you're doing and start horsing around every week on Pet Life Radio. Horse expert and award-winning writer Audrey Pavia will be trotting out great tips on feeding, breeding, and more on everything equestrian. So set a spell and say hey to Audrey and get ready for a darn tootin' galloping good time every week on Horsing Around, on demand, only on PetLifeRadio.com.